The champagne flute trembled in Marina's manicured fingers as her husband's laughter echoed across the marble-floored ballroom. From across the crowded charity gala, she watched Kevin lean into the circle of his business associates, his voice carrying just loud enough for her to catch fragments that made her stomach clench. "Divorce papers like some kind of threat," he was saying, his Princeton-educated accent dripping with condescension. "You know how emotional they get. Marina thinks she can scare me with her little tantrum." The men around him chuckled, their wives shifting uncomfortably. Mrs. Henderson, the mayor's wife, caught Marina's eye from across the room and quickly looked away, her cheeks flushed with second-hand embarrassment. Marina's grip tightened on her glass. 3 years. 3 years she'd spent building him up, using her connections in Atlanta's elite black society to open doors his old money couldn't reach. 3 years of swallowing his casual dismissals, his jokes about her being too sensitive, his increasingly frequent absences that smelled like expensive perfume that wasn't hers. "The prenup's ironclad," Kevin continued, adjusting his Armani cufflinks. "She signed it when she was all starry-eyed and grateful. Poor thing doesn't realize she'll walk away with exactly what she came with, nothing." The blood drained from Marina's face, but something else rushed in to replace it. Something cold and calculating that her grandmother would have recognized. The same steel that had built their family's media empire from nothing. She set down her champagne and smoothed her black Valentino gown. The one Kevin had complained was too dramatic for tonight. Her reflection in the ballroom's gilt mirrors showed a woman transformed. Shoulders squared, dark eyes blazing with purpose, her natural hair swept into an elegant crown that suddenly felt less like a compromise and more like a declaration. Kevin glanced her way and had the audacity to wink, as if they were sharing some private joke. If only he knew that in her Hermes clutch, next to her lipstick and breath mints, lay a flash drive containing 3 years' worth of his private emails, financial records, and video files that would make his Harvard-trained lawyers weep. Marina Devin-Kalu had been underestimated for the last time. But would revenge taste sweeter than the love she'd once felt for the man who'd just publicly humiliated her? Or would it cost her everything she'd fought to become? Marina hadn't always been the kind of woman who planned revenge while sipping Dom Perignon. 4 years ago, she'd been the idealistic daughter of media moguls James and Vivian Devin, fresh from completing her MBA at Spelman, ready to revolutionize digital journalism. She'd believed in love stories, in partnerships that lifted both people higher. Kevin Kalu had seemed like her perfect match, brilliant, ambitious, and seemingly enchanted by her vision for expanding minority voices in mainstream media. His family's old Charleston money had opened doors, yes, but Marina's intellect and connections had been the real power behind his meteoric rise in Atlanta's financial district. "You complete me," he'd whispered on their wedding night, and she'd believed him with every fiber of her being. Now, watching him from across their sprawling Buckhead mansion's living room as he scrolled through his phone with the same attention he once gave her love letters, Marina saw the truth. She'd been a stepping stone dressed up as a soulmate. Her best friend Simone arrived for their weekly coffee, designer heels clicking against the Italian marble floors. "Girl, you look like you're plotting someone's demise," Simone observed, settling into the cream leather sofa. "Maybe I am," Marina murmured, fingering the divorce papers hidden beneath a stack of interior design magazines. Simone's perfectly arched eyebrow rose. As Kevin's business partner's wife, she'd seen the signs too, the way Kevin's eyes wandered at dinner parties, how he'd started questioning Marina's expensive charity work, his subtle digs about her being too emotional for business decisions. "You know Marcus Henley's been asking about Kevin's books, right?" Simone said carefully. "Something about irregularities in client funds." Marina's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "Kevin handles his own finances." But that wasn't entirely true. As his wife, she'd had access to everything. Passwords shared in moments of intimacy, financial documents left carelessly on his home office desk, late-night phone calls she'd overheard from the hallway. Kevin had always underestimated her, seeing her success as fortunate rather than earned. He'd never imagined that the same mind that had doubled her family's media empire's valuation might be quietly documenting his every indiscretion. The man she'd fallen in love with, the one who'd brought her coffee in bed and debated social justice over dinner, still lived somewhere in her heart. But that man had been slowly suffocated by greed, entitlement, and the toxic belief that he could discard her without consequence. Marina had tried to save their marriage, suggesting counseling, planning romantic getaways, even swallowing her pride when she'd found the first hotel receipt. But love couldn't survive where respect had died. Now, as she watched Kevin laugh at something on his phone, probably a text from whatever 20-something he was currently entertaining. Marina felt the last thread of hope snap. Some bridges were meant to be burned. The question was whether she'd build something beautiful from the ashes or lose herself in the flames. The manila envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, hand-delivered by a courier who wouldn't meet Marina's eyes. Inside, grainy photographs showed Kevin leaving the Four Seasons with a young blonde woman, her hand on his chest, his mouth on her neck. Marina stared at the images spread across her kitchen island, her grandmother's china coffee cup growing cold in her hands. The woman looked barely old enough to rent a car, let alone break up a marriage. But it wasn't the infidelity that shattered her, she'd suspected for months. It was the note attached, written in Kevin's familiar handwriting. For when the wife becomes too much trouble. K. The words blurred as tears she refused to shed threatened to fall. 3 years of marriage, and she'd become trouble for expecting fidelity, respect, basic human decency. Her phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. Working late again. Don't wait up. The lie was so casual, so effortless, that something fundamental shifted inside Marina's chest. The woman who'd spent months making excuses for him, who'd blamed herself for not being exciting enough, understanding enough, accommodating enough, simply stopped. She walked to Kevin's home office, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. His computer was still logged in. He'd always been careless about security, trusting that she was too naive to understand his world of high finance and backroom deals. But Marina had been raised by sharks. She'd learned to swim in dangerous waters before she'd learned to walk in heels. The first file she opened made her stomach clench, client funds transferred to personal accounts. The second made her hands shake, falsified investment reports. The third made her laugh, a sound so bitter it scared her. Kevin hadn't just been cheating on their marriage. He'd been cheating his clients, his partners, the IRS. The golden boy with the impeccable reputation had been running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme, using his wife's social connections to recruit wealthy black investors who trusted the Devin family name. Marina's phone rang. Kevin's face smiled at her from the screen. The photo taken during their honeymoon in Santorini when she'd still believed in forever. Hey, beautiful. His voice was warm, practiced. Just calling to say I love you. I love you too, she heard herself say, the words automatic after years of routine. But as she hung up, Marina realized she wasn't sure she'd been lying. The tragedy wasn't that she'd stopped loving Kevin. It was that she might love him enough to destroy him before he destroyed himself. And everyone else in the process. The divorce papers in her purse suddenly felt less like an ending and more like a declaration of war. Kevin had taught her that love without respect was just elaborate self-harm. Now she'd teach him that a woman scorned wasn't nearly as dangerous as a woman educated. The next few weeks passed in a carefully orchestrated dance of normalcy. Marina smiled at dinner parties, laughed at Kevin's jokes, played the perfect wife while quietly building her case like a fortress around her heart. She'd forgotten how good she was at strategy, how sharp her mind became when focused on a goal. The skills that had made her invaluable in her family's business, the ability to see patterns, to anticipate moves 3 steps ahead, to strike at the precise moment of maximum impact, came flooding back. You seem different, Kevin observed one evening, sliding his arms around her waist as she prepared dinner in their gourmet kitchen. Lighter, somehow. Marina leaned into his embrace, breathing in the cologne she'd bought him for their anniversary. For a moment, she let herself remember what it felt like to love him without question, to trust completely. I've been thinking about us, she said carefully. About what we want our future to look like. Kevin's hands stilled on her hips. Marina, about the divorce papers. I overreacted, she interrupted, turning in his arms. I was emotional, scared. I'm sorry. The relief that flooded his features would have been touching if she hadn't known about the 18-year-old economics student he'd been tutoring in more than just market theory. I knew you'd come to your senses, he murmured against her temple. We're good together, Marina. You know that, right? We are, she agreed, and meant it in a way that would have terrified him if he'd been smart enough to understand. That weekend, they attended the Hamptons house party of one of Kevin's biggest clients, Senator Richardson. Marina played her role perfectly. The devoted wife, the charming hostess, the bridge between Kevin's ambitions and Atlanta's power brokers. She watched Kevin work the room, saw how he used her family's reputation to open conversations, her connections to close deals. He was brilliant at it, she had to admit. If only he'd channeled that intelligence into something legal. Marina, darling. Mrs. Richardson swept her into conversation with a group of wives. We were just discussing the charity auction next month. Kevin mentioned you might donate one of your family's exclusive media packages. Of course, Marina smiled, making mental notes about every name mentioned, every connection revealed. Information was currency, and she'd been collecting it without even realizing. Later that night, in their guest room at the Richardson estate, Kevin pulled her close with a passion she hadn't felt from him in months. "I love you," he whispered against her skin, and for a heartbreaking moment, she believed he meant it. "I love you too," she whispered back, and the tragedy was that she still did. Loving him didn't mean she wouldn't destroy him. It just meant she'd make sure he understood why. As Kevin slept beside her, Marina stared at the ceiling and wondered if revenge born from love was more dangerous than revenge born from hate. Love knew all the soft places to strike, all the wounds that would cut deepest. By morning, she had her answer. The woman Kevin had married was disappearing, replaced by someone harder, sharper, infinitely more dangerous. Someone who remembered what it felt like to be underestimated and had decided never to let it happen again. The divorce papers were still in her purse. But now they were just the opening move in a much larger game. Marina found the second set of books on a rainy Thursday evening, hidden behind Kevin's leather-bound first editions of Dickens. Books she'd given him for their first anniversary, back when she'd still believed in the poetry of their love story. The numbers told a story more devastating than any affair. Kevin hadn't just been stealing from his clients. He'd been using Marina's name, forging her signature on documents that made her legally complicit in securities fraud. Every charity she'd recommended to him, every friend she'd introduced to his investment opportunities, had become an unwitting victim of his elaborate scheme. Her hands shook as she photographed each page with her phone. Mrs. Chen from her book club. The Washingtons, who'd trusted the Devon family name for 3 generations. Even Simone's elderly mother, who'd invested her late husband's pension based on Marina's unknowing endorsement. The betrayal cut deeper than infidelity ever could. Kevin hadn't just broken their marriage vows. He'd weaponized her love, her trust, her very identity against innocent people who'd believed in her. Marina's phone rang, shattering the silence of Kevin's office. His photo smiled at her from the screen, that same honeymoon picture that now felt like evidence from a crime scene. "Hey, beautiful, working late again tonight." Kevin's voice was tired but warm. "Don't wait up, okay? This Richardson deal is finally coming together." "That's wonderful, honey," Marina managed, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "I'm so proud of you." "I love you, Marina. You know that, right? Everything I do for us." After she hung up, Marina sat in Kevin's leather chair and finally allowed herself to cry. Not for their marriage, that had been dying slowly for months, but for the woman she'd been, who'd believed in happy endings and second chances, who'd thought love could transform people into their best selves. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes love meant stopping someone before they hurt more innocent people. Sometimes love looked like justice. Marina wiped her tears and opened her laptop. If Kevin wanted to use her family's name for his schemes, he'd learn exactly how powerful that name could be when turned against him. The first email went to Marcus Henley, Kevin's business partner, with copies of the falsified reports. The second went to her own lawyer, a family friend who'd helped draft the ironclad prenup Kevin was so confident would protect him. The third went to investigative journalist Sarah Chen, who specialized in white-collar crime and had been looking for a story that would define her career. But the most important call Marina made was to her father. "Daddy," she said when James Devin's familiar voice answered, "I need to come home. And I need your help." "What's wrong, baby girl?" Marina looked around Kevin's office, at the awards with both their names, the photos of them at galas and charity events, the evidence of a life built on lies. "I married a stranger," she whispered. "And now I need to find out who I am without him." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Marina wondered if the call had dropped. Then her father's voice came through, gentle but steel-edged. "Come home, Marina. Let's remind this fool exactly who the Devins are." For the first time in months, Marina smiled without having to fake it. Kevin thought he'd married a naive young woman who'd signed away her power out of love. He was about to discover he'd actually married a sleeping lioness who'd simply been choosing not to roar. The revelation wasn't just about Kevin's crimes or even about her own strength. It was about the realization that she'd never needed him to complete her. She'd been whole all along, just temporarily convinced to make herself smaller to fit into his vision of their life. That woman was done apologizing for taking up space. The confrontation came on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Kevin was in his office, coffee steaming beside his laptop, tie loosened with casual confidence. Marina watched him from the doorway for a moment, memorizing the last peaceful moment he'd ever have. "Kevin," she said quietly, stepping into the room with a folder in her hands. He looked up with that easy smile that had once made her heart race. "Morning, beautiful. You're up early." "I've been up all night, actually." Marina set the folder on his desk with deliberate care. "Reading." Kevin glanced at the folder, his smile faltering slightly. "Marina, if this is about work stuff, I'm really swamped. It's about Mrs. Chen's pension fund. The one you invested in your Cayman Islands shell company. The one that doesn't exist." The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Kevin's face cycled through confusion, surprise, and finally, something Marina had never seen before, cold calculation. "I don't know what you think you found," he said carefully, "but you're clearly misunderstanding something." Marina opened the folder and spread the documents across his desk like tarot cards revealing a dark future. Bank statements. Forged signatures. Her signature on documents she'd never seen. "I understand perfectly. You've been using my name, Kevin. My family's reputation. Making me an accessory to fraud." Her voice was steady, but Kevin must have heard something dangerous underneath because he stood up slowly. "Marina, listen to me. For 3 years, I listened to you. I believed in you. I defended you when people said you were using me for my connections." She picked up one document, her own signature forged at the bottom. "But they were right, weren't they? I wasn't your wife. I was your cover story." Kevin ran his hands through his hair, and for a moment, he looked like the man she'd married, vulnerable, uncertain, human. It wasn't supposed to go this far. It started small, just moving some funds around to meet short-term obligations. But then clients wanted bigger returns, and the economy shifted, and you decided to steal from my friends rather than admit you'd made mistakes. I was protecting us. Kevin's voice rose, desperation creeping in. "Do you have any idea what kind of pressure I was under? Your family, your friends, everyone expecting me to be worthy of Marina Devin? I couldn't fail. I couldn't lose you." Marina felt something crack inside her chest, not her heart breaking, but the last chain holding back her fury. "So you made me complicit in destroying innocent people's lives. You forged my signature on federal documents. You turned me into the kind of person I've spent my entire life fighting against." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You didn't lose me, Kevin. You threw me away." Kevin moved around the desk toward her, his hands outstretched. "Marina, please. We can fix this. I'll make it right. I'll pay everyone back." "With what money?" "The Richardson's kids' college funds. Mrs. Washington's medical savings." Marina stepped back from his reaching hands. "There is no fixing this, Kevin. There's only consequences. You can't turn me in. The prenup. The prenup becomes invalid if you commit fraud using my identity," Marina said quietly. "I had lawyers check. Very good lawyers. The kind of lawyers my family keeps on retainer for exactly this type of situation." Kevin's face went white. "Marina, if you do this, you'll lose everything too. The scandal, the investigation. It'll destroy your family's business, your reputation. Is revenge really worth that?" For a moment, Marina wavered. He was right about the cost. The media attention would be brutal. The investigation would drag her family into court, expose every detail of their marriage, their finances, their private pain to public judgment. But then she thought about Mrs. Chen, who'd trusted her. About Simone's mother, who'd called her daughter and handed over her life savings based on Marina's unintentional endorsement. This isn't revenge, Kevin. This is justice. And yes, it's worth everything. Marina walked to the door, then turned back to look at him one last time. Kevin stood behind his desk like a condemned man, surrounded by the evidence of his crimes, the life he'd built on lies crumbling around him. "I loved you," she said softly. "That's the tragedy in all this. I really, truly loved you. And you used that love to hurt innocent people. Marina, the FBI will be here in an hour. I thought you deserved to hear it from me first." As Marina walked out of Kevin's office, she felt the weight of her decision settling on her shoulders. She was about to destroy her own life to save others, to choose justice over self-preservation. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done. It was also the most honest. Behind her, she heard Kevin calling her name, his voice breaking with desperation and disbelief. But Marina didn't look back. She'd spent 3 years trying to save a man who didn't want to be saved. Now it was time to save herself. Marina sat in her childhood bedroom at her parents' Buckhead estate, watching the news coverage of Kevin's arrest on her laptop. The reporter stood outside their former home, now surrounded by FBI vehicles, describing the sophisticated securities fraud scheme that had bilked investors out of millions. Kevin Kalu, prominent Atlanta financier, was arrested this morning on charges of securities fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. His wife, Marina Devin Kalu of the media empire Devin Communications, reportedly provided key evidence that led to the investigation. Marina closed the laptop. She'd seen enough. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in, Mama." Vivian Devin entered with a tea tray, her elegant frame moving with the same grace that had made her a force in Atlanta society for 3 decades. She set the tray down and perched on the edge of Marina's bed with the careful attention she'd given to bedtime stories when Marina was small. "How are you holding up, baby girl?" Marina accepted the cup of chamomile tea, her mother's cure for everything from heartbreak to final stress. "I feel like I've been hit by a truck I called down on myself." "You did the right thing." "Did I?" "Mrs. Chen lost her pension because of me. Because I married him, because I trusted him, because you're a good person who believed the best of someone you loved," Vivian interrupted firmly. "Kevin Kalu's crimes are not your fault. But exposing them, that's your victory." Marina's phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, friends offering support or demanding explanations. She'd stopped answering hours ago. "Simone's been calling," Vivian said gently. "She wants to know if you're okay." "Simone's mother lost her savings because of me." "Simone's mother is getting her savings back because of you." The FBI has already frozen Kevin's accounts. The recovery process has started. Marina looked up at her mother, seeing the same steel that had built their family's media empire from nothing. "What if I can't come back from this? What if this scandal defines me forever?" Vivian smiled, the same smile that had intimidated competitors and charmed advertisers for decades. "Marina Elizabeth Devin, you are my daughter. You survived Kevin Kalu, and you'll survive his aftermath. The question is, what kind of woman do you want to be when you're done surviving?" That evening, Marina walked through the gardens of her family's estate, her bare feet silent on the manicured grass. The Atlanta skyline glittered in the distance, the city lights reflecting her complicated relationship with home. The place that had made her but that she'd left behind for love. Her phone rang. For a moment, she considered ignoring it, but Kevin's name on the screen made her pause. He was calling from jail, using his one phone call on her. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Marina." Kevin's voice was hoarse, broken. "Thank God. I wasn't sure you'd." "You have 5 minutes," she said quietly. "I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know, I never meant for you to get hurt. I thought I could handle it, fix it before you ever found out." Marina closed her eyes, hearing echoes of the man she'd fallen in love with. "Kevin, I loved you. I know you don't believe that now, but I did. I do. Everything I did wrong, I did because I was terrified of losing you, of not being good enough for you. I know that doesn't excuse it, but—" "No, it doesn't," Marina said softly. "Kevin, you didn't lose me because you weren't good enough. You lost me because you lied to me. About everything. For years." The silence stretched between them, filled with everything they'd never say to each other again. "What happens now?" Kevin's voice was small, vulnerable. Marina looked at the Atlanta skyline, at the city where she'd been born, where she'd fallen in love, where she'd learned that sometimes destroying something was the only way to save it. "Now you face the consequences of your choices. And I learn how to live with mine." "Marina, I still love you." "I know," she whispered. "I love you too. That's why I had to stop you." After she hung up, Marina sat in her mother's rose garden and cried for the marriage that could have been. For the man Kevin might have been if he'd chosen differently. For the woman she'd been before she'd learned that love wasn't always enough. But when her tears were done, something new settled in her chest. Not peace, that would come later. But purpose. Clarity. The understanding that she'd chosen justice over comfort, truth over easy lies. Kevin was right about one thing. She was going to lose everything. Her marriage, her privacy, her carefully constructed life. But she was also going to find out who Marina Devin was when everything else was stripped away. And for the first time in 3 years, she was genuinely curious about that woman. 6 months later, Marina stood before a packed federal courtroom as Kevin's sentencing hearing reached its conclusion. The judge's words echoed through the marble-walled chamber. 15 years in federal prison, full restitution to victims, forfeiture of all assets obtained through fraudulent means. Kevin didn't look at her as the bailiffs led him away, but Marina felt his presence like a wound that was finally beginning to heal. She'd testified against him 3 times during the trial, each appearance a small death and rebirth of the woman she was becoming. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed with questions Marina had learned to deflect with professional grace. But one voice cut through the chaos. Mrs. Kalu. Mrs. Kalu, what do you want people to know about domestic financial abuse? Marina stopped, surprising herself. For months, she'd avoided the deeper questions, the ones that required her to be vulnerable in public. But something about that phrase, domestic financial abuse, unlocked something in her chest. My name is Marina Devin, she said clearly, stepping toward the microphones. And I want people to know that love should never make you smaller. It should never make you complicit in someone else's crimes, even unknowingly. The questions came in a rush, but Marina held up a hand for quiet. I also want the victims in this case to know that your trust wasn't misplaced. It was stolen. There's a difference. That evening, Marina sat in the offices of Devin Communications. The media empire her grandparents had built, her parents had expanded, and that she was now helping to reimagine. The Kalu had been quietly dropped from her name, but more importantly, she'd dropped the version of herself that had needed a husband's approval to feel complete. The Times wants to do a feature story, her father said, sliding a contact sheet across her desk. About financial fraud in marriages, using your experience as the centerpiece. Marina studied the proposal. A year ago, the idea of making her private pain public would have terrified her. Now, it felt like the natural next step in a journey she was finally ready to own. I want editorial approval, she said. And I want part of the proceeds to go to the Victim Recovery Fund. James Devin smiled, the proud, fierce smile of a father watching his daughter reclaim her power. Done. Her phone buzzed with a text from Simone. Mema's savings are fully restored. She wants to take you to lunch and tell you about her new boyfriend. Apparently, surviving Kevin made her feel brave enough to start dating again at 7 to 5. Marina laughed, the first genuinely joyful sound she'd made in months. Mrs. Chen had sent a similar message last week, along with a photo of her new puppy and a note that said, starting over at any age is possible. As the sun set over Atlanta, Marina walked through the city she'd grown up in, seeing it with new eyes. The skyline looked different when you weren't trying to impress anyone, when you were building something for yourself rather than maintaining something for someone else. Her phone rang one last time. Kevin's name appeared on the screen, a call from prison that she'd been expecting for weeks. For the first time since his arrest, Marina declined the call. Some conversations were finished. Some chapters were closed. Some love stories ended not with reconciliation or even understanding, but with the simple, powerful act of choosing yourself. Marina Devin, not Marina Kalu, not Marina Devin Kalu, just Marina Devin, walked home to the life she was building, one honest decision at a time. The woman who'd been afraid to take up too much space was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that taking up space wasn't selfish, it was necessary. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. 2 years later, Marina stood at the podium of the Georgia World Congress Center, addressing 500 women at the inaugural Reclaim Your Voice conference, an event she'd created to help women recognize and escape financial abuse in relationships. Marriage should be a partnership, not a performance, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. Love should never require you to sign away your power, your identity, or your intuition about right and wrong. In the audience, she spotted familiar faces. Mrs. Chen, now a volunteer advocate for elderly fraud victims. Simone's mother, whose story of starting over at 7 to 5 had inspired dozens of older women to leave unhealthy relationships. Even Sarah Chen, the investigative journalist whose expose of Kevin's crimes had won a Pulitzer and sparked nationwide conversations about spousal financial abuse. After her keynote, Marina retreated to the quiet of her hotel suite, exhausting but exhilarated. The conference had exceeded every expectation, but more importantly, it had proven something she'd needed to know. Her pain had purpose, her experience had value beyond the trauma that created it. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from publishers interested in her book proposal, 12 interview requests from major media outlets, and one text message that made her pause. Saw you on the news. I'm proud of who you've become. K. Marina stared at Kevin's message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some doors, once closed, were meant to stay that way. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in, it's open," she called, expecting room service. Instead, Marcus Williams walked in, her new business partner and the man who'd been quietly, patiently showing her what love looked like when it was built on respect instead of need. He carried 2 cups of coffee and the comfortable confidence of someone who knew he was welcome. "How does it feel to be a nationally recognized expert on marital financial abuse?" Marcus asked, settling beside her on the hotel room's couch. "Surreal," Marina admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. 3 years ago, I didn't even know such a thing existed. I thought Kevin's financial control was just marriage." Marcus had heard this story before, but he listened with the same attention he'd given it the first time, 6 months ago, when Marina had finally felt ready to trust someone new with her truth. "And now you're helping hundreds of women recognize it in their own lives," he said. "Mrs. Patterson from this morning's workshop told me you literally saved her life. She was planning to sign over her inheritance to her husband next week." Marina leaned against Marcus's shoulder, marveling at how different love felt when it didn't come with conditions, ultimatums, or the constant need to prove her worthiness. "I keep thinking about something Kevin said during one of his phone calls from prison," she mused. "He said he never meant to hurt me, that everything he did was because he was afraid of losing me. And I realized that's exactly the problem. He was so focused on keeping me that he never bothered to deserve me." Marcus pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "His loss became the world's gain. And mine." Marina smiled, thinking about the life she was building now, not in reaction to Kevin's betrayal, but in response to her own dreams, her own values, her own vision of what she wanted to contribute to the world. The Devin Foundation had grown into a national organization supporting financial fraud victims. Her book, Love Shouldn't Cost Everything, A Guide to Recognizing Financial Abuse, was being translated into 6 languages. And most importantly, she woke up every morning knowing that she was living as herself, not as someone's version of who she should be. "What would you have done differently?" Marcus asked, a question they'd explored before, part of their ongoing conversation about the past's lessons and the future's possibilities. Marina considered this, watching the Atlanta skyline twinkle through her hotel window. "I would have trusted my instincts sooner. I would have remembered that love multiplies your power, it doesn't diminish it. And I would have understood that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's self-destruction, even if it destroys everything you thought you wanted. Especially then," Marina said firmly, "because sometimes what you think you want is just what you've been told you should want. Real love, love worth having, doesn't ask you to choose between your integrity and your heart." As they sat together in comfortable silence, Marina reflected on the strange mathematics of loss and gain. She'd lost a marriage, a home, her privacy, her naive faith in happy endings. But she'd gained something infinitely more valuable, herself. The woman who'd signed that prenup in a moment of starry-eyed trust was gone, replaced by someone who understood that the most important contract you ever sign is the one with your own conscience. Kevin had been right about one thing: the prenup was ironclad. But he'd failed to understand that some things can't be contracted away: dignity, integrity, the power to choose justice over convenience. Marina Devin had walked into that marriage believing that love conquered all. She'd walked out understanding that love without respect was just beautiful destruction, and that sometimes the most radical act of love was knowing when to walk away. 3 years later, when Kevin was released on early parole for good behavior, Marina didn't attend his hearing. She didn't send a message or acknowledge his freedom in any way. She was too busy living a life he'd never imagined for her, one where her power came from within, where her worth wasn't negotiable, and where love was a gift freely given rather than a debt desperately owed. The last time she thought about Kevin Kalu, Marina was standing in the garden of her new home, watching Marcus teach her nephew to throw a baseball while she planned her next book about rebuilding after betrayal. Kevin had tried to take everything from her, but in the end, he'd given her the greatest gift of all: the knowledge that she was complete exactly as she was. Some love stories end with "I do." Others end with "I won't." Both can be equally powerful. Both can set you free. What would you have done in Marina's place? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, hit the like button, because everyone deserves love that lifts them higher, never brings them down.